Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Annie, thank you so much for being willing to come on the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast to share your journey of coming to the U.S. from DR. Fellow Dominican here, so it's really excited to, hear about other Dominicans' experiences and things like that. So thank you so much. And I would love for you to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about you and your childhood growing up in DR. We can get started there.
Well, thank you for having me, Heidy. It's my Heidy or Heidi? How do you pronounce it?
Either or.
Okay, Heidy. It's my pleasure. Well, yeah, like you mentioned, my childhood happened in the DR. I am an adult immigrant. I moved to the US when I was 27, 28, maybe. So I was born and raised in Santo Domingo, from La Zona Este. And I grew up in a very, I wouldn't say that the community was tight knit, but my family we almost all lived on the same street. So it felt very intergenerational. I was raised by my grandmothers and my aunts and friends of my family. And then that really, really built who I am. It's something that I've been able to ponder a lot about and think about since moving, how those women formed me and blessed me with their life experiences. And like most Dominican people that are privileged enough, private education, the ability to learn English at a very young age is like the epitome of my privilege, because it is the one thing that my parents gifted me that revolutionized and changed my life. The fact that I am bilingual, even though I wanted to stay home and watch Power Rangers, they still sent me to English classes in the afternoon, and that really shifted, and that opened up a whole new world for me, literally a whole new country. And from then on, it's just I wasn't necessarily I'm very extroverted, I think, or introvert. I don't know. Maybe I'm an ambivert. But I'm passionate about books. Learning, reading was something that became a passion of mine when I was 11 years old. So again, from that age, actually, was when this idea of moving to the US started forming, by consuming content that presented a world that I had access to that my parents didn't. So when I first traveled to the US when I was 10 years old, it was New York. Like, we're Dominican, so of course we have family in New York, right?
Yep.
So when I first traveled, for me, it wasn't that impactful. It was like a very touristy trip. There's not that much that I remember about it, but I think that via experiencing the US through content, books, TV, etc., I started picturing myself here. And there's also that part of me that never really felt like I belonged in the DR to an extent. In the way that I embraced myself, my beliefs, my expressions of myself. I'm like, I am that girl that it's too much. I am that girl that was never going to be able to stay with a Dominican dude, because like I don't put up with a lot of shit. Oh, can we cuss here? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. I'm so sorry if not, but this might happen again.
It's fine.
So from a very early age, I knew that it wasn't that I was not going to be able to subscribe to the systems of the DR, even educationally. Just thinking about how if you go to college in the DR, like there's very much like this one path that you have to take with your education. It's like, oh, if you study architecture, you're gonna be an architect, rather than like set designer, or like just imagining other ways to use your education. And I'm a 3 times college dropout. Like I couldn't do it. It was not,
Mm.
I love learning. I just couldn't be in that space that way. So yeah, at a very young age, it was very clear to me that not knowing how I was going to end up here.
Okay, so you said at 11 years old is when really that love or that thought of moving to the United States happened, but you didn't move until you were 27. Okay, so what event or what opportunity came up that you were able to finally move when you were 27?
So I've been traveling since I was 10, so touristically, and also doing like this, like I spent a short stint in New York, doing some education. Like I am, like I said, an avid learner, so I have a bunch of certifications and classes and things like that. So via networking, via knowing people, via fostering relationships, I ended up with a friend that lived in Rhode Island, that moved to Iowa, which I didn't even know where Iowa was at the time. It was 2014. I think she moved in 2013, maybe 2014. She moved there with her partner. And one time I was visiting friends on the East Coast, in Syracuse in New York. And she called me up and she's like, hey, you're going to be here for my birthday. I'm going to buy you a ticket. Come over. I'm like, sure. I am more than happy to do free traveling. Let's do this. So I went to Iowa, and over that weekend, it was only 48 hours actually, I met someone and I fell in love, and there's a lot of serendipitous situations there. Like obviously, if I'm Dominican, my birth name is not Woods, right? But it is now. And there's just like a very long story about that name and whatnot, but that was kind of like a sign for me. I'm like, oh crap, this person is my person. So it became, it was a long distance relationship for a while, very short while. I am not a person that can deal really with patience. Like I'm not very patient. So it became a situation of like, well, if we even want to date, we need to get married, because it's not financially sustainable for us to be traveling back and forth from the DR to Iowa.
Yeah.
So we made that decision, and on 2016 we got married, and that started a very difficult immigration journey, because that I am divorced. That relationship no longer exists, and that whole process of being married, like the loss of a marriage, the circumstances were really not amicable. It was not like I was not the person that was gonna like put up with anything to get my papers. Like I've had people that said like, well, you could have just stayed with this person, and I'm like, that's not like, if I was meant to stay in the US, I was going to find a way, but I was not going to put myself or keep myself in a toxic or unhealthy situation. So that really started a whole journey for me of building community in a place that I like, where I didn't know anyone when I arrived, except for my partner and my ex-partner and his family, and really developing relationships that became the foundation of my life now, and like a process of healing. So yeah, that's how I ended up in Iowa.
So how long were you in Iowa for?
6.5 years, maybe a little, well, give or take. And now I live in North Carolina, with my partner and our daughter. Yeah, it's very different here than Iowa.
I was gonna ask, are there Dominicans in Iowa?
Yes. So I was lucky enough to meet 3.
Okay.
I have not met one yet in North Carolina, though.
Well, I do know somebody who is, she's half Dominican, so.
Well, I think that it's because I live in the mountain. I don't live like Charlotte, Raleigh.
Yeah. Okay.
I live in mountain town, like I'm like an hour away from Tennessee. So it's just, I actually went to a coffee shop on Saturday, and the owner speaks Spanish. She's Mexican, and she's like, "Oh, you speak Spanish? Where are you from?" I'm like, "Oh, Dominican." Like, "How the hell did you end up here?" And I'm like, "I've been asked this question from Iowa and North Carolina, baby girl."
Yeah, same. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I remember when I had first moved to Florida, I had a Dominican supervisor. And then when I told him that, like I was from Grand Rapids, and he was like, "Grand Rapids, Michigan? There's Dominicans there?" I'm like, "There's a lot of Dominicans there, actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot more now than when I was growing up." But I was like, we're everywhere. So it's funny that how I asked, like, "Are there Dominicans in Iowa?" But we're everywhere.
Yep.
What was your first culture shock? And this could be like from when you visited or when you moved, just the first one that you can remember.
So from when I moved, because it wasn't, so what, it wasn't a shock. I'm not sure if it's a cultural shock, but it's still like something that that I struggle with. Weddings in the US.
Okay.
So after I moved, experiencing weddings in the US, it was like, I'm annoyed by the whole thing. Like, first off, they send the invite, but never tell you the dress code. I mean, we're Dominican. We want to show up, right? Like back home, women, guests rent dresses, hire professional makeup, hire professional hair, the guests. So the first time I get an invitation to a wedding in the US that doesn't have a dress code, I'm like, excuse me? What am I supposed to wear? And then I arrive there and it's like, well, everybody's wearing whatever the hell they want. I'm overdressed. I prefer it that way. But it's just like, just so different. Like, oh, the parties end at 10 p.m. I'm not a night owl, but like I have standards for my weddings. I'm like dinner, first breakfast, second breakfast, we all go home at 3 a.m. That. So I think that weddings was like the first thing that was like, oh, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
That's so funny. Yes, to me, and it could be just from our culture, like to me, weddings are formal attire. I don't care what the invitation says. I will overdress instead of, yes, like wedding is formal attire, but yeah, it could be from our culture.
Yeah, it's definitely our culture. Like, and it's not something, which is the funny thing for me, because I don't condone that in anything else, and like specifically in the DR. For me, it's like, why are people in a tropical island wearing like suit and tie every day to go to work? This makes no sense. But so it's funny now that I think about it. It's like how like I will not like it in certain areas, and then for the other ones is like, oh, it's indispensable.
Yeah,
it can't be any other way.
Yeah. So okay, you mentioned that you had traveled back and forth before moving. Was there anything different visiting home after finally like just being here?
Yes, there's just so many things that are different. So my path of immigration is a path of healing. There's been a lot that I've had to uncover, unravel, grapple with since moving, things that were normalized for me as I was growing up. And then I come here and it's like, oh, this has a name and it's not great. Like the things that culturally I gave for granted, that once I had the distance from it, were like, oh, that, like, I don't want that anymore. Like, that's not something that I'm proud of or whatever. And going back to the DR that first time was very shocking, was very, it was even depressing because I didn't yet have the tools to navigate setting new boundaries with my family, boundaries that for me were important, right? I didn't yet have the tools to really show up as the person that I had become. So it felt like putting on a mask. So that was like a big difference for me. And then just like the second time that I visited was completely different. I had been in therapy for 3 years. I had already, like, I was on my way. It was in 2020, so it was like in the midst of COVID. Was on my way to get my citizenship. I had a very stable job. And it was like, I was in a different emotional and mental state. So it was different in a better way. It was different in a way in which I was able to set loving boundaries with my family. I was able to experience the island the way that I wanted to, without feeling that pressure that, like, oh my God, I have to see everyone, or like just engaging in things that I didn't want to do. So yeah, so that's, and the things that I didn't like about the island are still there, like traffic. But then there's also the things that I'm like very nostalgic about. It's like, oh my God, like food and music and dance and friends, and that the impromptu nature of Dominican, like it's very different for me to, like socialize here, where you have to make plans with someone for 4 weeks in advance, where in the DR somebody will call you and be like, hey, you up for going to the beach? Yes, ma'am.
Let's go.
So that's so yeah, those are some of like the big differences and like the big occurrences after moving.
How often do you visit now?
Almost every 2 years. That might change now because I have a daughter. So she was born this year. I was in the DR last summer with my partner because we were planning to have the baby. Like we actually arrived at DR pregnant. This like I learned that I was pregnant 2 days before we left to the DR. And yeah, so she's gonna go meet her family now in November. So we're trying to find a way to fly there more often, but also it's a little bit more complicated, just like finances and stuff. When you think about there's a lot more of the world that we would like to see. Like you have to pick and choose of like, oh, like, yeah, I want, it's tough because like I want my daughter to have a connection to her roots and relationship with my family, but also I want to see the Northern Lights in Iceland.
Yeah.
What's that year's trip, right? So yeah, it should be an interesting decision making process from now on.
Is your whole family still in DR?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you're the only one here. Normally, well, for us, like we've all just like little by little, everyone like migrated like once at a time.
My family would not survive in the US.
Oh,
like and here's the thing, which is a conversation that I have very often. I was very privileged in the DR. I was like, my family wanted for nothing. So for them, actually, I was insane moving to the US because I didn't have, anything here. They were like, well, you're going to leave the island where you have not only your support system, but your family has a certain position, and like, and there's just those types of things. Like the wildest thing, like in the DR, I'm white, right? Like that's what my driver's license says. So moving here where I'm not, and like learning those things, that has been part of that cultural just like identity crisis that has come up. But yeah, my family would never survive here because they're very used to the commodities, like the things that make the DR good for those who have money.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. Domestic assistance and all that stuff like that.
Yeah, gotcha. And so now I want to get into the work that you do. How did that come about? Because I know you mentioned like you couldn't finish college. Seems like you have been doing your own thing from the job, like, not going through the cultural norms and stuff. So tell us what you do and how you got into it.
Yeah, so like I chose not to finish college. It's not something that that really fit my personality and what I wanted to do. And it was just very like, so the first career that I went to school for was psychology. I've always been obsessed with human behavior. And I've always felt, and I've always had like this motivational speaker thing about me and advice giving thing about me, but I didn't like the whole setting of going to school for that. So I've had many lives, many things that I've made money out of, photography, theater, film production, writing, all of those things like make my my job experience. But a decade ago, I became a life coach. I got certified as a life coach, but that was never the plan. I never really wanted to be a life coach. I got the certification because it came with a training that I was doing to be a transformational leadership coach or transformational leadership facilitator. And it was like, okay, so you do this and you also become a coach. I'm like, great. Then when I moved to the US, I couldn't work, right? Like I didn't have my paperwork yet to be able to work. So I was like, well, I'm going to lose my mind if I don't produce money and find something to do. So I started calling my friends. I was like, hey, do you need a coach? Do you need a coach? Do you need a coach? And that kind of like started that pathway. I started working with women that like I started networking in Iowa in that way. Like my network in Iowa is very, very strong. It's full of female entrepreneurs, where it's a beautiful blooming town for female entrepreneurs. And it's in Des Moines, Iowa. It's just the capital. And then with time, with my own immigration process and realizing all of the things that I had learned and all of the things that I had gone through, being diagnosed with PTSD because of my immigration process, because I went completely into survival mode, I started realizing that the majority of the clients that I was working with were immigrants, were women that immigrated as adults. And in supporting women, immigrant women, in designing the life that they want and living the life that they want, regardless of their immigration status, has really been a mission of mine for the last like 3 years. Now I'm really dabbling in the conversation of motherhood and what it's like to be an immigrant mom. But yeah, it's really helping immigrant women find home within themselves so that their new country feels like home, so that their old country feels like home, as long as they're safe within themselves. And they prioritize that and navigating tough conversations and navigating boundary setting and not having to choose between their cultures. Mm-hmm. It's really about like, what is the life that you want to live for yourself? Why did you immigrate? What did you dream of? What are the steps that you need to do, that you need to take, and who do you get to become in order to live that life? So I support women in that path.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And now I'm very curious to hear what your answer will be, because I do like to ask my guests like what the American dream means to them. Just because, you know, like you said, there's different reasons why people come. And you specifically, like, you had everything that you needed in your country. There was no like, I need to get out of this, you know? So what does the American dream mean to you?
The freedom to be myself.
Yeah.
Of being able to express myself, being able to explore things, of not fearing judgment at every step of the way. It's freedom. And even though, of course, as a woman, it's hard to feel free in this country, like things that you learn afterwards, but it's still that feeling at home in myself I never had in my former country, because there was just too many outside voices telling me who I had to be. And then there was always that push and pull within me, because I've always been a rebel. It's not like I actually complied, but it's still painful, because if you comply, you're not being yourself, right? Like there's a part of you that you don't know. But if you're a rebel, then you are separated from the people that love you and from the people that you love. Like my family always knew me como la loca, because I would like, I had no problem with packing up my stuff and going on a trip and like not calling anyone and like coming back 2 weeks later and they did not knowing where I was or whatever. And like, that's always been me. But it wasn't like, it wasn't, that wasn't a rebellious act for me. It was a self-love act. Like me going and exploring where I come from a family that's full of fears of what might happen, that's full of fear of, and that like spends their money in a way that is not the way that I like to spend my money. For example, like I love exploring. I like investing in my education. Like those are the things that I like really. In my wellness, I am like a super freak when it comes to investing in things that will keep me healthy. That's so the freedom to do that and be able to explore every possibility, that's the American dream to me.
Oh, that is so beautiful. How can people connect with you if they want to hire you as a life coach or just follow your journey? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, check me out on the Insta and on Threads. Haven't been on Twitter for years, and thank God that's imploding. My handles are Annie P. Woods. So Annie like the little orphan, P as in Paul, and Woods like the golfer. And that's how you can find me anywhere on the internets.
I will include your links in the show notes and in the descriptions. And Annie, I just want to thank you so much for your spirit, for your energy, for you and sharing your story. I loved it. I loved it. You're very yourself, free spirit, do what you want, go get it. I love it. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.